Hello everyone, welcome back. We were solving May-June 2024, paper 0455, variant 13, MCQ number 16. MCQ number 16 talks about how is the average cost of a product calculated. It's talking about the basic simple formula in order to arrive at the average cost. We all know how to reduce average cost of any product. We'll take the total cost and we'll divide it by the number of units or the total output in the denominator. So, according to the definition, what should be the answer? The answer should be option B, dividing the total cost by output. Hence, for 16, it has to be B. Let's look at MCQ number 17. MCQ number 17 says, why might measures to reduce unemployment also make inflation rise? Now they are saying that how could it be possible that in order to reduce unemployment, there is also being inflation witnessed in an economy? So they are asking me the reasons that could be behind policies to reducing unemployment. What could be the reason? A says they encourage cheap imports. B says they increase demand. C says they reduce firms' costs. And D says they require wages to fall. If you look at option D, they say they require wages to fall. Option D is incorrect. Why? Because when you're reducing unemployment, this means what? This means more people will be employed. So your wages are not falling. Instead, your wages are rising. So option D is incorrect. When we are looking at option C, they're saying they reduce a firm's cost. When you're reducing unemployment, this means employment level is increasing. So when employment level is increasing, this means what? More and more people will be employed. So a firm would be paying more in terms of salaries, right? In terms of bonuses, so the firm's payments will have to be increased. A firm's cost will be rising and not falling. So option C is incorrect. Now, if you look at option A, it says they encourage cheap imports. However, when we are reducing unemployment, it means what? It means more and more factor of production is employed. So when more and more factor of production is employed, your productive capacity is increasing. So your imports might not be encouraging. It would be your exports that would be encouraged. So option A is incorrect. Finally, we are left with option B. That's the correct option, which says that yes, when you are reducing unemployment, because demand is increasing, inflation could rise. And yes, it makes sense. Why? Because it's talking about too much money chasing too few goods. What happens when you're reducing unemployment? So what is happening? You're increasing the aggregate supply. When you're increasing the aggregate supply, what if the demand for products increases faster than the available supply of goods? What happens? Too much money chasing too few goods. As a result, inflation would also rise simultaneously. Hence, for MCQ number 17, B is the correct answer. I hope it's clear. Let's move on to number 18. Now, don't be intimidated by or overwhelmed by looking at these bar graphs, right? Whenever any pictorial representation is given, mark my words, they're relatively easier. All you need to do is pay a little close attention and there will be hints in the question, right? All right. MCQ number 18 says, the diagram shows selected areas of government spending for a country. National defense, education, health, and unemployment benefits. Now, these are all the areas which a government spends on, right? They've given you the stats, the amount a government is spending, allocating towards the provision of each of these services. Now, they're saying, what was the total government spending on merit goods? Now, before we look at the options available, recall by definition, what do we mean by merit goods? Yes, merit goods are what? Merit goods are products which are more beneficial to the consumers than they themselves realize. And so what happens? They will be underconsumed if they are left to the market forces, remember? And what do you think out of these four services they mentioned, which of them or which of these are merit goods? National defense, education, health, unemployment benefit. Yes, education and health are merit goods. What about national defense? National defense is a public good. And what about unemployment benefits? Unemployment benefits will be falling under supply side policy, right? So education and health are merit goods. Now, what were public goods? Public goods were what? Products which were non-rival and non-excludable, right? And they are financed through tax. And what would fall under public goods? Yes, national defense and yes, policing system. Why? Because the idea of non-rivalry and non-excludability seeps in when we are talking about public goods, right? The free rider problem is there, right? So it's education and health, which is merit good. So now the total government spending on education and health is what? $36.4 billion and 81.8, right? So when you will add the two up, the answer would add up to 118.2 billion. So it's option C. For 18, it has to be C. You see, it was looking difficult, but then once we looked at the definition and we solved it logically, things become easier, right? Things get clear. All right. Let's look at number 19. Number 19 says what correctly explains the effect of monetary policy measures on macroeconomic aims, right? So now they are looking at how monetary policy is creating an impact on macroeconomic goals. Option A. Option A says a higher exchange rate will make imports more expensive and improve the balance of payment. Now, if the exchange rate is high, so what happens? Will exports get more expensive and improve the balance of payment? A higher exchange rate will not improve the balance of payment. A higher exchange rate will be worsening the balance of payment, right? Now, option B says an increase in interest rates will encourage investment and lead to higher economic growth. If the interest rates is rising, so investment do not increase, investment decrease. Why? Because it gets costlier to get loans. So you will chop B off. Option D says higher interest rates results in less income from savings and therefore higher unemployment. It's incorrect. Why? Because when interest rates are high, people tend to save more and spend less. So income from savings increase rather than decreasing. And it's an incorrect statement. So you chop D off. Now, after chopping A, B, and D, you are left with C. But then let's look at it in the logical way. An increase in the money supply in an economy without spare capacity will result in demand pull inflation. Yes, that's true. Why? Because when the government increases the money supply in an economy, and if there does not exist any unemployed resources at the moment, so what happens? Demand pull inflation occurs, right? Too much money chasing too few goods. Why? Because in the short term, it's relatively impossible for the government or for an economy to respond to higher demand. As a result, what would happen? A shortage will occur. Why? Because the demand is more than the availability of the goods and services available in an economy. As a result, when the shortage of goods exists, what happens? Prices will rise, inflation will increase, right? Demand pull inflation will occur. So it has to be C. For 19, it's option C. I hope it makes sense and you all are with me. All right, let's look at MCQ number 20. MCQ number 20 says, what is the most likely impact of lower direct taxes on demand and on supply? So now first tell me, what do we mean by direct taxes? Direct taxes are taxes on income and taxes on profit. So we are talking about income taxes and we are talking about what? Corporate taxes, right? Firms, corporation taxes. Now they're saying what would be the impact of lower direct taxes? Means what? You are reducing direct taxes. So you are reducing income tax, you are reducing direct tax. So now they are saying what would be the impact on demand and on supply. So once a government has slashed down the rates of income tax, what do you think should be the impact on demand and supply? Should the demand increase and or decrease, and should the supply increase or decrease? Yes, very simple. Yes, the demand should increase and the supply should also increase. Why? Because when you are reducing direct taxes, you are giving individuals and firms the ability to spend more. So they will be left with more of disposable income. Hence, the demand for goods and services will increase. And the supply of goods and services will also increase. Why? Because the firms will be left with more profits. They will be able to repatriate their profits, increase their production level, and the supply of goods and services will also be increasing simultaneously. All right. So for 20, it has to be option C. Number 21. Number 21 says the table shows the annual change in the GDP before adjustments for inflation have been made and the annual rate of inflation in 4 countries. So now A, B, C, D are 4 countries. The first column shows you the change in GDP. The second talks about the inflation rate percentage. Now they're showing you the change in GDP and they're showing the inflation rate. So what we've got to do is we've got to reduce the real GDP, right? That is GDP that is accounted for inflation. And how will you come to that figure? The increase in the GDP, you will subtract the inflation rate from it, right? So 5 minus 6 will give you what? 1%, right? 5 minus 6 will give you what? 1%. So it's a negative 1%. It's in percentage, it's a negative 1, right? Because the change in GDP was 5, but the inflation rate was 6. So this means what? That the GDP has actually fallen by 1%. In country B, what is happening? The GDP is rising by 5 and the inflation rate has risen to 7. So the increase is what? 3%. It's a positive 3. What about C? In country C, the GDP change is 15 and the inflation rate is 14. So the change is of +1. In option D, the change in GDP is 20 and the change in inflation is 40. So it's a negative 20. So which country has the highest rate of growth? So in which country do you think there is a positive development in GDP or there has been an increase in real GDP? Yes, it is in option B, right? So for 21, it has to be B. Let's look at number 22. Which type of unemployment is generally regarded by economists as the least serious for the economy? So out of these 4 options, which do you think is the least troublesome or the least to be worried on by an economy? A says cyclical, B says frictional, C says regional, D says structural. Now, what do you think should be the option? A says cyclical. Now, what was cyclical unemployment? Cyclical unemployment is unemployment that is demand deficient, right? Caused by lack of aggregate demand, right? So this is demand deficient unemployment. This is what? This is serious or not serious unemployment? Yes, this is serious unemployment. They're saying which is the least serious. Frictional. Frictional is what? Yes, frictional is the least serious. Why? Because frictional unemployment is what? It's temporary unemployment, right? It's temporary unemployment arising from workers being in between jobs. Regional unemployment is actually a type of structural unemployment only. And what is structural unemployment? Structural unemployment is unemployment which is caused by a decline of certain industries, right? Or particular occupation. So it's arising from long-term changes in demand and supply. And regional unemployment is a type of or a part of structural unemployment. It is unemployment which is caused by a decline in jobs in a particular geographical location, right? In a particular area of the country. So which is the least serious? Frictional unemployment. When people are either in search of different jobs or new jobs. Remember seasonal and causal unemployment? So both fall under frictional unemployment. So for 22, it has to be B. All right. Look at the keyword they've highlighted. It's least. All right, number 23. Number 23 says the CPI, the Consumer Price Index for a country rose from 1 year from 125 to 150. They're saying what was the country's rate of inflation. So from 125, it rose to 150. So what was the change? Change was 25. So the change, the increase divided by the initial, so base 125 into 100. This is how you'll reduce the rate of inflation, and it would come out to be what? Would come out to be 20%. So it has to be A. So for 23, it has to be A. Number 24. Number 24 says, what does the HDI, the Human Development Index, indicate? So come on, give me the definition for HDI. HDI is what? It's a measure of living standards, which takes into account income, education, and life expectancy. So come on, what does HDI indicate? Economic development, level of unemployment, living standard, rate of inflation. Excellent. It indicates living standards. The definition says it, right? So for 24, it has to be C. Easy. Number 25. What best describes relative poverty? Now, before we look at the options, come on, tell me what is relative poverty and what was absolute poverty. Let's recall it. Yes, absolute poverty is what? It occurs when people do not have enough income to pay for their basic needs, right? People do not have enough income to pay for their basic needs. That's absolute poverty. But what about relative poverty? Relative poverty is when they are poor relative to other people in the country, right? When you're drawing a comparison. Now, keeping the definition in your mind, let's look at the options. A says a 12-year-old boy has never been able to access a doctor or school. That's irrelevant. B says a person earns less than the minimum defined level of income. That cannot be relative poverty. C says a person has a lower standard of living than the minimum level acceptable in a society. Yes, that's the correct option. Why? Because we are saying when people are poor relative to other people in the country, right? So that's the same option is being reflected in the definition, right? So it's the same thing we're trying to say. A person has a lower living standard than the minimum level acceptable in a society, right? D says a person is unable to afford the basic necessities of life. This is absolute poverty, right? So it cannot be D, it cannot be B, it has to be C. So for 25, it's option C. All right. Let's look at number 26. Number 26 says the table shows population statistics for 3 countries in a particular year. So X, Y, and Z are the countries. Now, they've given you population figures. How? In the first column, they've given you the size of the population. In the second, they're telling you the birth rate. In the third, they're giving you the death rate. In the last, they're giving you the net migration. That means how many people left their country and how many people poured into their country. So they're giving you a net figure for that. Now they're saying what can be concluded from the table. So now let's look at the options and then let's check out. A says country X has fewer females than country Y. The table does not give us any evidence, any statistics for males and females, so you can chop A at that moment only. B says country Y has the smallest population increase. All right, we'll find out this. C says country Y has the highest living standards. Can you make any statement about living standards by looking at the death rate or the birth rate or the net migration? No. So you can chop C off. D says country Z has a decreasing population. So now we are left with B and D. Now let's solve it first and then find out which is the correct option, B or D. Now, birth rate and death rate. In country X, what is happening? In country X, the birth rate is 10 and the death rate is 8, right? Per 1,000 of population per year. So the increase is what? The increase is birth rate minus the death rate. It's a plus 2. In country Y, it's 20 minus 18. Again, it's a plus 2. What about in Z? It's 40 minus 35. It's a plus 5. Now, in country X, birth rate minus death rate was plus 2 and the net migration was positive 20. So you could say it was arising at what? Plus 22,000. In country Y, what's happening? A plus 2 and a plus 50 would give you what? 52? A plus 52. In country Z, what's happening? It's falling. The net migration, the people who have left are greater than the people who have entered, right? So this means what? It has a decreasing population, right? Country Z is having a decreasing population. So this makes sense. But before locking our answer, let's look at B. B said country Y has the smallest population increase. Country Y does not have the smallest population increase. Country Y has the largest population increase. How? We've arrived at the figure was plus 52, remember? 2 and the net migration was positive 50. So it was plus 50. It was the highest population increase, the largest population increase. So now you'll show B as well. So by logic and by elimination, we have found out that D is the correct answer. So for 26, it has to be D. I hope it makes sense. Number 27. What is most likely to promote international specialization? Now, out of these four options, this is only going to be one, which is promoting or encouraging specialization. A says similarities in climate in different countries. B says similarities in the availability of natural resources in different countries. C says instability in foreign exchange rates. Now, if there are similarities in climate or similarities in the availability of natural resources, specialization cannot be promoted, right? Because you do not have any added advantage. So you can chalk A and B. C says instability. Now, so if there is instability in foreign exchange rate, you think specialization would occur? No. So A, B, and C are what? They are all discouraging specialization, right? So you cannot go for any of these options. What about the last option? The abolition of tariffs and custom duties. Yes, that's the correct response. Why? Because once you are removing trade barriers, you are encouraging or you are paving way for specialization. You are promoting specialization. So for 27, it has to be D. You're making it easier, right? You're creating an incentive for countries to specialize. So for 27, it is D. Number 28. What are the effects on price and equilibrium quantity of the imposition of an import tariff on a good? So now if tariffs have been imposed on a good, what do you think should be the effect on price and on the equilibrium quantity? Tariffs makes what? Tariffs makes imports expensive. So when imports are expensive, what happens? The price has to increase or decrease. The price has to increase. So you can chop A and you can chop B because they are both saying price has to decrease. So what about the equilibrium quantity? The equilibrium quantity will rise or fall. The equilibrium quantity has to fall because it's making imports expensive. So it has to be option C. So the price increases and the equilibrium quantity falls. So for 28, it has to be C. Number 29. Number 29 shows the market for the Indian rupee in US dollars. Now they've given you the supply curve, they've given you the demand curve. Now they are saying on the vertical axis, they've given us the price of rupees in dollars. On the horizontal axis, they are giving us the quantity of rupees. Now, initially, the demand curve was D1. Now, what happens? That the demand curve is shifting outwards towards the right. And as a result, what is happening? As a result, what is happening? That the as a result, what is happening? That the exchange rate has risen. If initially you were getting 1 rupee was for $1, now in terms of 1 rupee, you're getting $2, right? So the price of rupees in dollars is increasing, right? As a result, what will happen? Now they're saying what will cause the demand curve for the rupees to shift from D1 to D2. Now they're saying why do you think the demand curve has risen, moved outwards, shift outwards? A fall in Indian exports to the US. Now, option A says a fall in Indian exports to the US. A says Indian exports would be falling. So if the exports are falling, the demand for rupees would be falling. But here they are saying that the demand for rupees would have been increasing, right? Why? Because the price of rupees is increasing. So the demand is increasing in this case. In this case, the demand is increasing, but they're saying the opposite. So you chop A. B says a fall in the US inflation rate. So if the US inflation rate is falling, so the demand for rupees was to fall, but here the demand curve is rising outward, the demand is increasing. So B cannot be the option. D says a rise in the interest rates in the US. If there would have been a rise in the US interest rates, the demand for rupees would have been falling, but here the demand is increasing. So again, you will chop D off. C says a rise in foreign direct investment into India. Yes, that's the correct option. Why? Because once FDI is increasing and more investment is increasing into India, so the demand for rupees has to rise, right? So this makes sense. So for 29, it has to be C. Number 30. Number 30 says the diagram shows China's trade with Brazil for 2 years. So the lighter bars are depicting year 1 and the darker are depicting year 2. Now, if you look at China's exports in year 1, this is the amount of exports and this is the amount of imports. So overall, what do you think? The balance of trade was, the trade balance was positive. But what happened in year 2? In year 2, this is the amount of exports around hovering around $2 billion and imports are around what? Around 4.3 or $4.4 billion. So the exports are relatively less than the imports. So what do you think would have happened? Yes, Downzy. Now the trade balance is what? The trade balance is in a deficit scenario. Initially, the exports were more and the imports were less. So you were in a surplus. And in year 2, it went into a deficit, right? So what should be the correct option if you look at it in this way? Yes. So we are moving from a situation of surplus to deficit. So it has to be D. 30 has to be D. In year 1, the exports were more than the imports. The exports were greater than imports, right? Exports were around, let's say, 0.9 and imports were around, let's say, 0.7. So exports were more. So you were positive, right? So you were in a surplus situation. When? In year 1. But in year 2, the situation changed. In year 2, the exports were less and the imports were more, right? So as a result, what happened? You moved into a deficit scenario. So you move from surplus to deficit, hence it has to be option D. I hope this is clear and you all understood and liked what we did. Stay tuned, keep watching, subscribe. We'll be coming back with more such videos to facilitate you. Thank you.